After my divorce, I spent a few months trying to explain what had happened. Not to other people. I'd gotten reasonably good at that version. To myself. The real accounting. The kind where you sit alone at night and try to trace the actual line of how you got somewhere. What I couldn't ignore, once I looked at it honestly, was a pattern I'd been pretending wasn't there. The 3 significant relationships in my life, not just my marriage, but the 2 before that, shared something I had never named. Each of those women, in their own way, had needed rescuing. Not dramatically. Not in any way that announced itself as a problem from the outside, but at the center of each relationship was someone carrying something heavy, someone slightly sinking, and me constructing myself around the business of keeping them afloat. In hospice work, that had been my whole function. I held things for people. I was reliable in the way that useful objects are reliable. And I'd assumed for years that I'd simply chosen people who brought out that quality in me. It took a long time, and Jung, to understand that I hadn't chosen at all. Not consciously. Something else had been doing the selecting. Here's what Jung identified, and it took him until 1925 to write it down clearly in an essay called Marriage as a Psychological Relationship. Every person carries an inner image of the person they will love, not a checklist, not a preference, an actual internal figure built from the earliest years of life. Out of the first relationships, the first experiences of being seen or not seen, the first impressions of what closeness feels like, what it costs, what it promises, Jung called this image the Anima in men, the Animus in women, and he was careful about what he meant. Not an ideal, not a fantasy, but a psychological structure, an image that already exists before you meet anyone. And here is the part that matters. When you fall in love, Jung wrote, you are not falling in love with the other person. You are falling in love with your own image, which you have unconsciously projected onto them. The attraction you feel, that particular aliveness, that sense of recognition, the feeling that this person is different from everyone else, is partly a response to how precisely they are carrying your projection. How closely, in this moment, they resemble the inner figure you've been carrying for years without knowing it. That's why early love feels so much like coming home to a place you've never been. It does feel like recognition. It is recognition. Just not of them. This isn't a criticism of love. Jung wasn't being cynical about it. He was describing a mechanism as precise and involuntary as the way your pupils adjust to light. You don't choose to project. The projection precedes the choice. It's already happening before you've formed a conscious impression of the person. But it explains something that most people can't explain when they look at their own history. Why the same dynamic? Why the same emotional tone, showing up in what look like entirely different people? Why the pattern persists even when you've specifically decided you're going to choose differently this time? Because the choosing is happening below the level where your decisions reach. The second mechanism Jung described is connected to the first, but it operates differently. He called it the feeling-toned complex, and what he found, working with patients for decades, is that a complex doesn't simply live inside you passively. It reaches. It has what functions like an agenda. In the 8th volume of his collected works, Jung wrote that a complex can be suppressed with an effort of will, but it cannot be argued out of existence. At the first suitable opportunity, it reappears in all its original strength. What this means in relational terms is this: somewhere in your history, a pattern of emotional experience formed around something that wasn't resolved, a kind of love that felt conditional, a safety that depended on being needed, an intimacy that arrived alongside pain. Whatever the configuration was, it formed a complex, a cluster of feeling, memory, and expectation that operates with its own energy. And that complex doesn't wait for your conscious permission before it begins responding to the world. The charge you feel when you meet someone, that inexplicable pull, the sense that something real is happening, is often the complex recognizing a configuration it already knows. Not because that configuration is good for you, because it's familiar. Because the psyche, in its deep layers, is not primarily concerned with your happiness. It is concerned with completing its unfinished business. The people you're drawn to, the ones who carry that particular quality of aliveness for you, are often the people whose emotional architecture most closely resembles the original wound. Not because you want to be hurt again, because the complex is trying to get back to the site of the original interruption, hoping, this time, that something will resolve. I didn't understand this clearly until I was sitting across from a therapist, and she asked me a question I hadn't thought to ask myself. She didn't ask why my marriage had ended. She asked what I had gotten out of being the one who held everything together, what I had received from constructing myself as the person other people could lean on. I remember not answering for a long time, because what came up wasn't a comfortable answer. What came up was that I had needed to be needed, that somewhere in my own early history, my value, my sense of being worth keeping, had become entangled with my usefulness, that I hadn't been attracted to people who needed rescuing. I had been recruited to them by something in me that still needed to prove its case. The relationships hadn't been coincidences. They'd been the complex trying, over and over, to re-enter the original field and get a different outcome. James Hollis, one of the most careful interpreters of Jung's clinical work, wrote that we do not choose our partners so much as they are chosen for us. Not by fate, but by the unconscious agenda we bring into every room. We are looking, he observed, for people who will complete what we haven't been able to complete in ourselves. And because that search is unconscious, it tends to look, from the outside, like terrible taste. It isn't terrible taste. It's an unfinished conversation. Now here's what I want to be careful about, because this idea is easy to hear wrong. Knowing this doesn't automatically break the pattern. There is no information that simply cancels a complex by arriving in your consciousness. Jung was explicit about that. The complex doesn't dissolve because you've correctly identified it. The process of actually metabolizing the original material, really sitting with what formed it, understanding what it needed, letting it complete something rather than just suppressing it again, that process is slower and harder than insight alone can manage. But something does shift when the knowledge lands. What shifts is the question you bring to your own experience. Before you understand the mechanism, the question you keep asking is about them. What was wrong with them? Why they turned out to be who they were? How you keep getting fooled? The question keeps its focus on the outside, on the selection, as if better selection could solve a problem that begins before selection. After you understand the mechanism, the question changes direction. Not harshly, not as self-blame, but you begin to ask, what in me recognized something in them? What did the pull feel like, specifically? And what older feeling does it resemble? What is the part of me that organized itself around this configuration, and what was it hoping to finally resolve? That's a different kind of investigation, and it goes somewhere the other question couldn't reach. Jung believed that making the unconscious conscious was the essential work, not because it makes love impossible or turns attraction into a clinical exercise, because it makes genuine relationship possible between actual people, rather than between projections looking for each other in the dark. You're not attracting the wrong people because something is wrong with you. You're attracting the people your unconscious currently needs to find. The work is in learning to hear what it's asking for without letting the asking run the whole show. That distinction, once you find it, tends to be worth sitting with for a while.